A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
You might have heard Pope Francis has died, and Professor Clare Johnson, Director of the ACU Centre for Liturgy and Professor of Liturgical Studies and Sacramental Theology at ACU, is joining us. She's based in Melbourne. Clare, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Very nice to be with you.
Clare, let's just pause and reflect for a few moments. These health problems have been plaguing the pontiff for quite some time. This is not a surprise necessarily that he was becoming close to death, and I know that the Catholic Church has been preparing around this for a long time. But he's had all sorts of health issues dating right back to his youth, hasn't he?
Yes, that's right. Apparently he had a health issue. He was a young man, and that's sort of been something that he's learned to live with, and has lived, 88 years, which is a pretty good innings, really, for somebody who's had health challenges. But yes, he's been very unwell in the last couple of months in particular, and I think, he almost died when he was in the hospital at Gemelli Hospital in Rome, and, was very close to death then. So I think Catholics were very happy to see him coming back and reaching out to people in his typical wonderful way, and it's been lovely to see him making a big effort, because obviously he was very unwell, just to be with people during Easter, particularly this most faith-filled time of the year.
And Clare, it wasn't just the recent issues around breathing and the stroke yesterday, but so often when we've seen images in the media, he's been in a wheelchair and chronic sciatica and a painful nerve condition, making walking difficult. So life hasn't been easy for the Pope over this past decade, has it?
No, it hasn't, but he has struggled on, and I think that's a wonderful testament to his character and his desire to continue doing his job. His mind was very clearly there the whole way, and he also knew that death was not far off. I think he certainly put in place the preparations as far as he could for what is to come in the next few days, and ensured that his wishes were very well known in terms of a humble approach to the ceremonies that are going to occur, that the whole world will be watching.
Clare, you're an expert when it comes to issues around what happens next, and his body, I guess, even as we speak, is being embalmed, and he's going to be prepared to lie in state. Are the things that are coming over these coming days something typical for a pope, or is there something special about the way Francis will be treated?
Well, the Pope is treated differently, perhaps from others who die in that he has particular rituals that are performed. His death would have been certified medically. Firstly, there would have been prayers prayed for him at the time of death. And then there's a ritual verification that would have taken place where the Camerlengo, the Chamberlain, who is actually taking charge of the Vatican in the interregnum, the time in between papal reigns, and that's Cardinal Kevin Farrell. And he would have undertaken this ritual verification of the Pope's death. And that's done by calling the Pope 3 times by his baptismal name. So Jorge Bergoglio, so Jorge was his baptismal name. And confirming each time he called the name that there was no response. The baptismal name is used because he is no longer the Pope, so it's appropriate to call him by his baptismal name at that point. And once that ritual verification of his death took place, the papal ring would have been removed from his finger, and then it would have been crushed with a ceremonial silver hammer, and this signifies the end of his papacy. And of course, as we know, his office and his private apartment would be sealed. And I saw footage of that this morning on the television, so that they will stay sealed until he is buried and the new Pope takes over. And then his body would have been given into the care of the funeral directors, who, as you said, would be embalming him for public display, which will happen.
When we talk about the end of a reign of a pope, and as you say, there's rituals that are gone through. The smashing or the destroying of the signet ring and marking the end of a reign. What's so important about that ring? Have you got any insight there?
It's called the Ring of the Fisherman. So it's an ancient tradition that the Pope would wear this ring to indicate his continuity back to St. Peter, the fisherman. And so it's one of the signs of his office. He has many signs of his office, the white soutane that he would typically wear, and the white skull cap he would typically wear, as well as when he was presiding at Mass, he would wear what's called a pallium, which is a small lamb's wool stole that's embroidered with either black or gold crosses that he would wear over the top of all of the rest of his vestments. And that's an indication of his authority as well as his papal staff. So there are lots of different ways in which his authority was publicly displayed, the ring being one of them.
And so when we see a pope and all of the vestments and the extra bits and pieces, and for a lot of our audience who are Protestant and don't always see the value in some of the significance of those things, it certainly becomes very, very useful in describing what a pope does and his leadership of a global movement, when you can say that there's meaning for all of those things.
Absolutely, yes. So he's the only one who would wear the white skull cap and the white soutane, the very long robe with the buttons down the front, and that he was very, seen in that most frequently, I think, even up to his final day on earth when we saw him in the Pope-mobile going around St. Peter's Square. That marks him out. He's the only one of our clergy who wears that particular robe. And it's a way, I suppose, of proclaiming his office. It's covering any sort of preference that he as an individual man might have, and it's representing the office rather than any personal choice on his part. So he is the office, and the clothing indicates that.
Okay, let's talk about what comes from here, because a 9-day mourning period, as I understand it, prayers, requiem masses every day. The mourners have begun to gather there at the Vatican. What do you see as is likely to eventuate over this next 9 days?
So the 9 days actually begin from the funeral itself. So they don't, the novendiales, as they're called, the word novena means 9 days of particular intercession or suffrage, as it's called in this case. So masses of suffrage will be prayed every day in the Vatican for 9 days, beginning with the Requiem Mass, which will happen in St. Peter's Basilica. And then after that, the process of choosing the next pope will occur. The conclave will be called. The conclave can only be called 15 days after the pope's death. So his funeral will take place between 4 and 6 days after he died, and then from 15 days onward, the conclave can be called. And that's the process where all of the cardinals representing the various parts of the church around the world will gather together in Rome to elect his successor.
Now, the funeral's usually held in St. Peter's Square, and 6 days after his death, he's not going to be buried under the Vatican. In fact, his wishes are that he's to be buried in a different location. There are other popes buried there too, but what do you understand about is there any reasoning why he wouldn't want to be buried under the Vatican?
I think it speaks to his character, actually, that he's a man of the people, and he wants to, I think, be in a place where the majority of the people can get easy access to the tomb to offer their prayers for him. So he made it very clear that he didn't want to be buried in the crypt under St. Peter's Basilica, where previous popes, many of them, have been buried. So he chose Santa Maria Maggiore, St. Mary Major Church, which is one of the 4 papal basilicas around the city of Rome. This one's in the Esquilino neighbourhood. And Pope Francis has been known to go to Santa Maria Maggiore before and after each of his overseas trips. So he has a particular image of the Virgin Mary that he likes to pray in front of. And he's asked to be buried in, one of the side aisles between 2 of the chapels in Santa Maria Maggiore, and really just to be buried in the ground, in the earth, and to have a stone over the top of his tomb that will simply read Franciscus. That's all he wants, just his name, his papal name.
So there's a level of simplicity that I think lots of our listeners might note about Pope Francis, as you say, a man of the people, aligned with St. Francis of Assisi and with vows of poverty. What does that look like when you reflect on Pope Francis, the ways that he's aligned himself as an image of leadership?
Well, he did not want to stay in the papal apartment for a start. Yeah, there's a very lovely papal apartment that popes typically have lived in. He decided that he wanted to be closer to the people, and so he chose to live in a small apartment in Casa Santa Marta, which is where the dignitaries visiting the Vatican, the clergy visiting the Vatican would stay. So again, a very humble choice, and but a choice that speaks to his desire to be near his people. And he was known to have dinner in the dining room at Santa Marta there, and converse with people because he wanted to be around them. And then you think about, his choice of car. So he had a very small car, like a Ford Focus that he wanted to, or a Fiat, I think it was, but a very small car that he would be driven around in rather than a papal limousine. And I think lots of his choices indicate his willingness and his desire to reach out and be really close to the people. Another one that's interesting, Neil, on Holy Thursday, so Thursday last week, he photographed yet again going to visit prisoners in the prison and to offer them his blessing and his best wishes. He wasn't able this year because of his health to wash the feet of the prisoners, as he would typically have done on Holy Thursday, as part of those rituals, reenacting that event from Christ's life, which demonstrate his humility to wash the feet of those who are willing to have their feet washed. And they didn't even need to be Catholics. In terms of Francis, he washed the feet of Muslims, he washed the feet of women. He was very reaching out all the time to be as close to the people as possible, to have the smell of the sheep on him as their shepherd.
Okay. When he is the funeral there at the Vatican, a wooden coffin, oftentimes, and I've recognised this and having watched some funerals over the years, the way of not appearing rich and extravagant, because you can think that there's the Pope and, he owns the Vatican. And, this idea of humility and what he owns and how he is to be buried, what can you let us in on here that might be very significant for understanding where the heart of the man was?
Certainly. So in 2024, so as recently as April 2024, Francis revised the instructions that were to be carried out upon the Pope's death. So this is an official set of instructions that the Vatican follows. Normally, a pope would be buried in 3 coffins, so one coffin inside another coffin, cypress, lead and oak. And Francis simplified these rituals so that he would just be buried in a zinc-lined wooden coffin, just one coffin. And his embalmed body will be on display for people to come and pay their respects to, but it won't be on a bier or a raised platform with just the body on display, as was the case with Pope Benedict and previous popes. Pope Francis will be in his coffin, and people can see him in his coffin for those 3 days, which will probably start on Wednesday of visitation before the funeral occurs. And the coffin will be closed prior to the funeral, and in that coffin, as I think I mentioned, we have the bags of coins minted during his pontificate. A lead tube with an account of his papal deeds will be included in that. And then the pallium stoles that he will have worn during his presidency of the liturgy during his reign will be in there as well.
Claire, let me ask you, so just take this a little deeper for a moment, because the Pope had lots of friends, and there were some who didn't think he was doing a great job too. He was considered the most progressive Pope for perhaps many generations, eroding some Catholic traditions by moving towards a globalist ideology and some moral relativism and political activism, even when he made political statements. I wonder if you've got any thoughts on how you think he's going to be remembered, because when you're at the top and you are defending the church, perhaps he was not as big a defender as some might have hoped. Any thoughts from you?
He was polarising to some extent. Those who are conservative by nature are wanting to conserve things as they are, to keep things as they are. And Pope Francis, I think, was very much aware of the need for the church to maintain currency and to push the boundaries slightly. He could have pushed further than he did, but there were some limits as to what he could do. For example, some would want to have seen him approve the ordination of women to the priesthood. Now, he certainly ruled out that very clearly, but he instigated 2 investigations into whether Catholic women could be ordained as deacons in the church. And so he never followed through to completion with those inquiries. One is still open. And so we didn't see him go quite as far as he could have in that sort of area. He was unafraid, though, Neil, to call a spade, internally and externally. So he was known to have said to clergy, you mustn't be preaching your homilies for longer than 7 to 8 minutes, or the people will not stand for it. Always have something valuable to say. He was always trying to combat the scourge of clericalism. So this notion that the clergy are somehow above the laity and are superior to the laity in the church. He did not like that at all, and that would not have been popular among some quarters. But for Francis, he really saw the value in every person. One of his most recent initiatives, of course, was the synod on what they call synodality. So synodality essentially is a conversation among many parties within the church, and you probably would have seen photos of the gatherings at the Vatican where the clergy and religious men and women and laymen and women are gathered around circular tables in conversation with each other. Now, Pope Francis was most certainly widening the circle of who could be in the conversation, which some who have been in a privileged position and the only ones consulted might have seen as a threat. But I think Francis is very aware that the church has to move on a little bit in some ways in terms of reaching out to the world as it is now, not how it might have been in the 1950s.
So there's this progressivism that perhaps Francis will be remembered for. What about his successor? Because some are saying that the majority of the cardinals have been appointed by Francis, and the thought that the new pope might well be a clone of Francis in his progressiveness. Any thoughts from you on how the enclave works? Because, as I understand it too, cardinals are not always just, put into a corner and set into a box, and that's just not who they are. They're significant leaders in their own right. What are your thoughts about what's coming with the papal conclave? Is this an important time for Catholics? What are your thoughts here?
Absolutely, it's an important time for Catholics, Neil. The conclave will be the gathering of the cardinals who can elect the next pope. Pope Francis has appointed 79% of those who will be eligible to be elected. Now, you have to be under the age of 80. There are more cardinals who are still alive over the age of 80, 252 in total, 138 electors. Among those, though, Francis has really widened the pool beyond the typical dominance of the Europeans. So only 20% of the cardinals will be from Italy, for example. And then we have representatives from all sorts of other countries, more so than ever before in this gathering. So I think, when people are called into a role, others don't always know how they're going to be. We see this in politics. So opposition leaders are sometimes very good in opposition. We don't quite know what they're going to be until they get into the position of being the Prime Minister, in our case. We're not always necessarily going to know exactly what direction a pope is going to go in, even though he may have been appointed by someone like Pope Francis. It does not mean that the cardinals are clones of his, nor that they will share every view he had. However, I think, we can hope that the progressiveness, careful progressiveness. He was never radical. He was very careful in his attempts to shift the church into a new, more expanded direction. And I hope that we will see that trajectory continue. But he's also very much a centrist in terms of his application of church teaching and maintenance of the core of that teaching. That has not changed under Francis, and I think we need to remember that as well.
Well, wonderful getting your insights, Clare. Professor Clare Johnson is Director of the Australian Catholic University Centre for Liturgy and Professor of Liturgical Studies and Sacramental Theology at the ACU. To connect with Clare, you do so through the ACU website, acu.edu.au. That's acu.edu.au. There's so much more to talk about, and perhaps we'll have an opportunity to talk again very soon, Clare. But thank you so much for your great insights around what is so significant, as I would describe Pope Francis and popes in general, the most significant Christian leaders in the world. And while not everyone's Catholic and everyone has their denominational affiliations, there's no escaping the fact of the influence of such a man. Clare, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today on 2020.
You're most welcome, Neil. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.